So just to reiterate that last point, it is very much an open question now. We're not actually we're not making a proposal to you at all. We want to hear what you have to say, and we'll then hopefully arrive at a consensus on that as to how to proceed. So, comments? Mike, who's Killian? Okay, I can't see him. Where? Sorry, who's Terry? Yeah. Terry over here, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Terry again. Shannon Ardern, everybody that I seem to come into...
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Everybody that I seem to associate with rules Shannon Ardern as being one of the key issues that should be addressed in its reform, should be addressed in some future form. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tom Burke over there, behind you.
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose it's one of my pet bugbears, but the whip system as it operates at present, effectively we have an American presidential style government without the, albeit imperfect, constraints that apply in America. We need to have some system where the Constitution is obeyed and the government is answerable to the Dáil, not the Dáil answerable to the government. Thank you.
I think in fairness, Tom, we had a full meeting on all aspects of Dáil reform. And, you know, I think what will be stated in that report will reflect that meeting and will reflect somewhat on at least the point you make. Thank you. Other comments? Alban, please.
I just want to back up Terry in what he's saying about Shannon reform. And I think it's particularly important from a northern point of view because I believe that a thoroughgoing reform of the Shannon, without going into the detail of it, could provide an interface between North and South, a very, very useful political space. And with a little bit of imagination, we could reconfigure Shannon Ardern and get that sort of northern input, both nationalist and unionist. So I see that as crucially important, particularly in the context of the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay, thanks very much, Alban. Maureen and Katrina and David, okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. As I asked a question on this yesterday, I'd again like to make a plea today that we include our environment for any future convention, because we can talk about all sorts of rights that we might have economically, socially, culturally, but if we don't have a safe world that's environmentally clean to live in, all of the rest of the rights that we're looking for will be just academic. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Katrina, please. And then David.
Mary Lou MacDonald sent in a paper that I think everybody here got, and if they didn't, it's certainly out there. And the proposals that we're making are, one, that a new convention should be convened, that while this convention has done very, very good work and very important work, and I have to just want to pay tribute to each and every one of us who have been part of it and to the team who have done very, very important work. It's obvious that there are many outstanding issues, and we've heard some of them this morning. So the first thing is we'd say there should be a new convention. I won't go into all the details that's in the paper. We've made some points about how you would address that, though we would argue that the current Secretariat and Chairperson continue, but that there should be a three-model approach. The first is prioritise the outstanding Good Friday Agreement obligations under Strand 3, because I would join with Alban. I think that is very, very important in relation to fundamental freedoms, and particularly as we move towards 2016. The second would address the public demand for renewal of the political institutions, and that would cover what people are talking about, the Shannons reform, but also local government reform and participatory democracy, which we heard from young people here earlier. So let's not just tie ourselves to a very narrow remit in relation to that. And the third module would look at other constitutional matters that have been previously identified but haven't been included in either the first or second module. It could look at, and again, the young people were leading the way, constitutional separation of church and state, and the contradictions between the Irish and English versions of the Constitution. So the paper is there. I would ask people to read it. We've put a lot of thought into it, and I think it very broadly reflects a lot of the issues that we have discussed. But again, I just would like to say this, for me, as a politician in the north, from the west of Ireland, I would just like to say this has been an amazing experience, and I would hate to see that we just end it here. I mean, there's been lots of good work done, I know, in the south with the Constitutional Review Group. We can't just leave all that work shelved. There's been lots of good work done over the last year and a bit, and let's not just end it here. I think that would not be a good way as we move towards 2016. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. David, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just firstly, I'd like to reiterate what's been said just about the work that has been done, the work that needs to be done. God bless me, but I'm going to quote Fianna Fáil. We've done a lot done, more to do. And the Secretariat have done a great job on that. What I'd like to talk more specifically about, though, is every single meeting we've had, an issue we've constantly come back to is the courts, the courts, the courts. So I think it's vital we look at the appointment of judges, or someone does, if this is a go-ahead, because it's a murky process, to say the least, in terms of the appointment of judges. And I think it definitely needs to be looked at to try and ensure transparency.
Thank you. Okay, a few voices over here. Yvonne first, and then John, and then Aideen. Mike, Yvonne, please. Sorry. Yeah.
The first thing on my mind was, especially when this started, was would the government follow through on all the things we recommended? I was very cynical, but I'm glad to see they have started to work on them. The main reason I'm standing up is the family and issue of mortality. The one thing I really feel strong about is the family. The family is not traditional now anymore. Like, there's a lot of them are not, people don't marry and they have children. And I always feel there is still a stigma against them. And the other one I think is very important, and it started to be discussed, is the right to die. And I cannot understand why a human being would be left in horrendous pain to die. They could last 6 months, a year, really and truly be seriously ill. And I can't see why euthanasia is, in certain conditions, I'm not saying everybody should have it, but that is dying. I left that bit out. Yeah. Although there's a few people I could think of could do it. Okay, that was my main point anyway, euthanasia, for somebody very seriously ill and wants to go.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. That might go down. That might go down as the quote of the week. John.
Should probably start with me. Anyway, as a little bit of a contrarian, as you all know by now, I feel that in point one, Senate reform is virgin ground for another constitutional grouping. Number two, I would just add in after the headline, or amorality. On the Bill of Rights, we have to engage with our fellow countrymen in the North. It's absolutely essential that we send out a message that we're open to engagement with them in hopeful developments into the future. On church and state, it appears to be an invitation to throw out our Christian, centuries-old Christian heritage. And on number 5, I believe it always will remain hugely important to look after the environment.
Thank you, John. Aideen, please. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Chair, one of the things I think came out over many of our discussions was the language in the Constitution itself. And, you know, the fact that that language is not inclusive language, particularly when it comes to women, for example. But one of the other things that struck me very strongly, I mean, these are all excellent areas that we could address, but based on the discussions that we already had at this convention, I suppose the one glaring hole that stuck out for me was in relation to Article 41. And it's already been touched on by Yvonne, but it's to do with the definition of family in the Constitution. And in at least 3 of our debates, the one on same-sex marriage, the one on the role of women in the home, and I think there was a third one as well, there was a clear feedback from the floor that the definition of family in our Constitution is unacceptable in modern Ireland. And particularly, as Yvonne has said, you know, it's the family based on the institution of marriage, which, as we all know, most children born in Irish society today are actually born outside the institution of marriage. So, I mean, I think there should be a clear, I suppose, perhaps reflection in the final report of this Constitutional Convention that, you know, that this was a recurring theme. And even though we didn't have an opportunity to reach it as a specific issue, to look at the definition of family, that it is something that the state really does need to consider. I mean, I've always been very struck by all of our debates. All of our debates so far here have been around the whole issue of inclusion and how we can be a more inclusive society. And of all of the definitions in the Constitution, I think that is the most exclusive of the whole lot and really should be addressed.
I should just say that it is our intention we have produced reports right up to and including the meeting on blasphemy, which was the meeting held in November. We have had our 2 meetings then on the issue of Dole reform and the issue of this weekend on the economic, social and cultural rights. We've proposed to produce a report on Dole reform and another report on economic and social and cultural rights, reflecting what we vote on this now in a few minutes. And we're proposing to produce a final report, which would actually be on the any other amendments, which would reflect the range of opinions that were expressed about these issues, and which very much would reflect the what we heard as we went around the country. And picking up sort of thing you said there, Aideen, that in the course of our overall meetings, there were certain themes that emerged. So it will require a bit of crafting, if you like, this final report. But it would acknowledge the fact that there were a number of quite disappointed people and groups that we didn't get to consider their specific interest topic. So that's how we propose to deal with it, and I think, you know, we very much then, in that context, take on board your comment. Okay? Yeah, Catherine, please. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. One of the criticisms I had at the beginning of this process was that there was very little control the convention itself had in setting its own agenda. And I think that if there's to be a future agenda, I think it should be a much more inclusive one in terms of the agenda setting, that it shouldn't be exclusively the government that decides predominantly what the agenda is, but that it's a more open process and much more involving of the citizens rather than the political the people who are involved in the political institutions.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? If we're not, we will find something else to talk about before we have the vote finished. I mean, picking up on Catherine's point, I mean, there is a basic issue, I suppose. Does the convention wish to express a view on whether or not there should be another convention? I mean, we've had Katrina made the point very clearly that it's the view of Sinn Féin, and I know it's the view of other individuals that there should be. But I mean, that's an issue perhaps on which we would put on the ballot paper as well. the separate first basic question, should or should there not be, well, what we're doing, we'll be recommending there should or should not be an additional convention. After that, I mean, and we do, and it really directly relates to what Catherine says, are there key lessons that we've learned from this convention that we think, almost a separate agenda item to what another convention might prioritise, but are there other lessons that could be learned from the way we worked? And one of them could well be about who sets the agenda for a future convention. I think I saw Avril first and then Jerry. Thanks.
Just to take up on the first question, I mean, I think there is a lot of unfinished business, so I do think that there should be another convention at some point, but only when we can see that the recommendations that have been made by this convention have been acted upon. And I think that is the key thing. We've recommended a lot of referenda as it is, so I don't think it would make sense to have another convention. Say next year when you have 5 or 6 referenda that have been recommended but not put to the people, I think you would have to see action on it first for the exercise to have validity. And particularly you'd have to see the government holding referenda on issues that it hadn't intended to do so already. Because if it's only endorsing, and we've seen some of that with the recommendations that we've made to government, where on some of our recommendations they've been very clear they will have a referenda. Others, like we were very strong on wanting to change the nomination process for the president, and all we've seen from government so far is that that has been kicked to a committee. So I think we need to see that the exercise has validity and has been taken seriously by government first. And then I would strongly endorse the point that Catherine made in terms of the agenda for a future convention. Because, again, I think some of the issues that we were given to debate, particularly in the earlier stages, wouldn't have been the most key. Things like I support the change in the voting age and the changes to the presidency. Maybe there was some validity in that when we were learning how to do this process, that we weren't discussing the most contentious issues first, but I don't think another convention could repeat the same experience. So I think it would be important that you would kind of crowdsource, you would select the convention members, probably do a similar process, but then crowdsource the ideas that people actually want to see discussed and let all the groups make presentations and recommendations, maybe have a public poll, public vote in terms of the issues they feel a convention should discuss, and then let the convention members themselves decide, so that you're really getting a proper public participation in the process rather than just responding to an agenda set by the government.
Thank you. Jerry?
Thanks, Chairman. I think there is unfinished business, and I think as part of our final report, I would certainly like that we would include this desire to hold another constitutional convention in whatever shape or form it is. I think there are recommendations we've made that government will, I think, hold referendums on next year, but it is also the prerogative of government to reject what we've done here. I mean, that is their prerogative, and we should not forget that. That is, that the government may decide they don't agree with what we did, and that's their prerogative. I think the issue of the agenda, I think I would agree with both Avril and Catherine. There is a need for a shared responsibility between the government and I think this body here who've had the experience of 13 months. And I think given that it was a pilot project, if I can use that term, which has become a success, I think that there needs to be a critical analysis done and some kind of a literary review by academics and by practitioners and by all of us here. And maybe, and I'm just saying maybe, and Art will love this, at a later time, we may hold a one-day review exercise as opposed to doing it online or by questionnaire, away from the glare of the hype of this weekend, which was, I think it's important that we critique it ourselves as well, and to be objective. I think you can't do it today in the aftermath of a weekend, but I think we must recognise that the convention was a success, and that we should, in our report, go back to government to say, if it's the view of the convention, that it should be continued either in the next stall or in this stall. Come out.
Thank you. Well, actually, that brings it. Sorry, I will take the comments that I've seen, but I do want to. Actually, that's a direct segue, David, to what you wanted to talk about, because it would. The survey. Would you speak to that now, and then we'll come back to the floor.
Okay, thanks, Tom, and thanks for giving the segue possibility. You may have noticed you haven't been surveyed this weekend, and there's. The main reason is because the academic and legal team were hoping that you would bear with us for one more survey that we want to send you after this process is over. And I think it's important that you hear from us at least why it is we think it's important that we do this survey work. Because this is a world first. the closest that any of us are aware of anything like this was the Citizens' Assembly of British Columbia, the province of British Columbia in Canada, where it was just a citizens' assembly, there were no politicians involved, and they only discussed one thing, the electoral system for the province of British Columbia. And there was so much international interest in that. Other places followed their example, and to a degree we have followed their example also. But this has produced quite a lot of learned work on the virtues of this kind of approach, which has informed us and informed others along the way. And right now there's a lot of people who've been watching us. We heard this last night about the amount of people who are looking on at the website. But also various of us are asked to go overseas and talk about this experience. The British, I know, are interested. The French are interested. The Belgians are interested. And more countries besides. And it is crucially, we think, crucially important that we don't miss this opportunity to provide a full and complete coverage, systematic coverage of what this has involved and how this has impacted on society, but of equal importance, how it's impacted on the members of the convention. So we would ask you, if you would be willing to do this, to respond to quite a detailed survey that we're going to be sending to you in the next week or two. And also, those of you who might be willing, we'd like to try and take the opportunity to have one-to-one interviews with you as well. We want to record this moment of history to make sure that others learn the mistakes, learn the lessons, learn the successes from this.
Okay, I think that's a very, it follows directly on from what Jerry said, and I think it would be of enormous value to all of us, and not just to the people in this room, but to... Now, I saw a number of hands going up. I saw Susan, first of all, Sheila, and I think I saw Ivana as well. So we'll take them in that order. Susan, please.
Hello, Susan Brady. I very much enjoyed being a part of the Constitutional Convention, but I did think we lacked statistics from government bodies. I think in a lot of areas we lacked the mathematical mind and the mathematical analysis that the government keeps talking about that we need to instill in the future generations. For an example, yesterday at our table in particular we discussed housing, yet we weren't furnished with statistics from government agencies which are as follows. The government has a housing department. We weren't furnished with the amount of people with housing allowance or rent allowance. We weren't furnished with the amount of people on RAS schemes. We weren't furnished with the amount of people, mortgage holders, which can be obtained from the local property charge and the inland revenue. We were not supplied with numbers in relation to people in sheltered accommodation. And most important of all, I emphasise the most important of all, we were not given any type of indication from the banks on how many repossessions they are looking at in the next couple of months. And if we were provided with them kind of figures, which are there, which is accumulated by government, maybe we would have been able to make a much more informed position in relation to housing and how it stands currently and how we're going to deal with housing going forward. So I found statistically we lacked an awful lot. Mathematically, there was very little statistics provided from government agencies. Again, in relation to the voting age, I don't know if this can be established. We did not establish, could we have established who voted between the age of 18 and 21? And that would have indicated the apathy, really, have we many people voting between the age of 18 and 21? And therefore, why would we want to reduce it if there's very little people involved in voting between the age of 18 and 21? I don't know the answer to that because I wasn't provided with statistics on that. I don't know if that can be established because I know there's a lot of confidentiality around voting. So I think if there was to be another constitutional convention, and hopefully there will be, I think government agencies should be obliged to provide statistics on the area that we're discussing. And maybe housing was one of them in particular where there would be a lot of statistics on. And that particularly would be an area, and I think we would have been able to make it much more informed, particularly in relation to banks and repossession of houses.
Thanks very much, Susan. Could I go directly to Sheila, please?
Thank you. Sheila Canavan. Just in relation to any further business in relation to the decisions that have already been made at this convention and what might happen down the road in relation to referenda. It would be my opinion that the Referendum Commission could benefit greatly from a convention-type seminar to kind of clarify for them the thinking of this convention in relation to how referenda should be structured and worded going forward, because I feel a little bit anxious and concerned that the nature of some of the business we decided here might get skewed down the road before it eventually gets to the electorate. Thank you, and thanks for everything.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I mean, that issue, obviously, of how the recommendations are to be given effect, and that has to be, in certain cases, via referendums, is actually of crucial importance, no question about it. Ivana, please. And then Egon.
Ivana Bacik. Thanks, Tom. And just to say, I agree with the others who said it's been a hugely successful model in deliberative democracy and participation and in coming to very clear recommendations on a whole range of issues. And I think some of the key strengths that should be repeated, and I think in a future convention, are the engagement of both citizens and politicians, the fact that we had a tight time frame, and the fact that we were asked specific questions. And I think our best weekends were those where we were dealing with specific questions rather than with broader with a broader range of issues. I think that's something that is a lesson, perhaps. I think it's not yet, of course, the end of the process, because as others have said, we do have to see the outcome now in the shape of the 3 referendums and probably more that will be held next year as a result of our recommendations. And I think if you look at the time frame, it's probably possible only to do this exercise once in the lifetime of every government, or in other words, once every 5 years, to give time for the recommendations to be followed through on and for the referendum process to be held. But I think that we should be recommending, I would like to see us recommending that there would be a future convention, that it would build on the work of this by adopting a similar model, and that any other amendments that we have in front of us that were really crowdsourced already, that these should be the issues that should be going forward for consideration in a future constitutional convention, because there was clearly huge support for debating these issues. Had our time been extended further, we would have hoped to get through all of these issues, I think.
Okay, thank you. Eon, please.
Thanks, Chair. Very quick, sorry, Aon O'Riordan. Just to make the point, I suppose, what have we learned from this? I know when this convention was announced originally, it was derided. I remember being on a panel debating with somebody saying it was a complete waste of time and that the issues being discussed were very cut and dried or almost irrelevant. And then I think what we've all learned is that every single issue that we discussed, once you dig deep into them, they're not as simple as they present themselves originally. And I think I certainly think we have to have another convention. I would definitely support that, and I think the issues that are raised here are deeply important to an awful lot of people. However, if we're going to dig deep into these ones, we have to maybe have an appreciation of the type of timescale that we'll need in order to give it justice. The second thing I would say is, I think this is down to yourself, Tom, and Art, and your entire team here, and also the participants who have given this convention the credibility it has. But I don't think the wider public are necessarily aware of the type of discussions that we're having here, and the nature of them, and how detailed they are, and of the deliberations that we're having. But the convention will only have credibility if what we have decided here today and in previous weekends actually results in having referenda. People will not come back here and discuss issues like political and institutional reform, family, issues of morality, Bill of Rights, church and state, the environment, if it's not going to go anywhere. So I think there is onus on government to be seen to act, and look, I'm a government TD, I completely accept my own responsibility in that seen to act on the deliberations of this convention before we move to the next stage, where people will engage and will dig deep into these issues, but only if it sees itself going somewhere. We have a broken republic. This is an opportunity to repair it into a certain degree, but people will only believe in that process if it's seen to actually go somewhere. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you. Councillor, please.
Thank you, Catherine Murray. I would just like to say that I feel where we are with the Shannon at the moment, I think it is something that seriously needs looking at, because I presume a lot of people thought we wouldn't have a Shannon Éireann at this point in time. And I think if we were to go along with some of the thinking, say, where we have another convention in the next 5 years, that I think that's a little bit too late to look at Shannon reform. So I would just like the opinions of the top table, perhaps, on a suggestion of maybe reconvening this convention just to deal with the issue of Shannon reform in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I don't think we're in a position to take decisions about that, to be honest. I mean, in any event, one of the reasons for talking to you as members of the convention is that, you know, ultimately you might wish to express a preference as to what issues should be dealt with. I mean, certainly some people feel the channel reform is of considerable importance, but other people feel that some other issues are of even greater importance. So we're actually going to ask you, how do you rank issues in terms of their priority importance? So I think that's the way that's to deal with it. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Tony Farrell is my name. I think this has been a marvellous exercise, and I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to participate. And I think I probably reflect the opinions of most of the people here who took part. That it was very well organised, thanks to Art and his crew. I'm just looking at the list of other amendments that people have put forward, and I'm considering also all the amendments that we have already put forward. And just as an observational point, I think it's coming to the situation where maybe we should be having a convention to look at the whole of the Constitution, article by article, because I mean, the way I'm looking at it, we'll be holding referendums for the next 20 years. We're a bit like the guy that's going to his mechanic and getting new bits added to the car, hoping to end with a new model, you know. Perhaps it's time to look at the thing overall and bring it up to date and do a trade-in. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it does bear recalling that the Constitution Review Group, which were under the chairmanship of Dr. Ken Whitaker, examined the Constitution article by article and produced a very fine report in 1996. So that just to add that to your comment, Tony, I mean, that's also something that has been done. Any other comments? Because I think we might be, yeah, sorry, Terry, and first of all, and then Tom.
Thank you, Terry, again. My comment is all the work that the convention has done should result in referenda. And when those referenda take place, I think is crucial. That we've done a lot of work and we should entice, or want to entice, the public to vote, which didn't happen, I don't believe, fully in the last referendum for various reasons. One of the reasons was alluded to by Sheila, that the wording was perhaps not saleable, for want of a better description. It didn't sell itself, it didn't entice people out of their homes with a willingness to vote. And I think that the people drafting the referenda need to kind of, while they need to be technically correct, I can understand that, there needs to be some kind of sales technique where you want to entice people out of the home to vote. And also the day of the voting, having it midweek is totally out. Perhaps a Friday so that students can get home for the Friday night, which they tend to do. If you leave it till Sunday, people are often leaving, going home, going back to their place of work or their institution. You get my point, that the day that the referenda is on is crucial to the work we've done, and the wording of it must be saleable. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Tom.
It's an issue that came up yesterday when we were discussing housing. I raised the question of why we didn't see Article 43.2 applied more. That's making ownership of property subject to the common good. And one of the experts, I can't remember which, told us that traditionally Article 40.3.2 took precedence. And I feel if the ownership of the common good was given priority, we might have less problems on the housing front, and it might be something that could be considered in the future. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to come? Yeah, could we have the mic up here, please, Pat? Sorry, no, it's here.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll just keep this very, very brief. It's more of a commentary than anything else. In relation to what we saw this morning, the reflections from Youth Work Ireland, I think we have been discussing over the various meetings the need to engage the public, and particularly the youth, in the overall political process. And when we were looking at the whole issue of electoral reform, one of the sidebar issues that were discussed was actually how to promote the knowledge and awareness of the political system, given its flaws and failings, at both primary and secondary level. Perhaps it would be an opportunity under any other business to make some recommendation that some sort of task force or committee or whatever grouping could be set up between the Department of Education and the Department of Taoiseach to perhaps progress a programme that could be run through either transition year programmes or at primary level, or indeed through the traditional civic subject on community awareness and citizens' awareness as well, and how the political process can serve the citizen and how the citizen can engage with the political process. Thank you.
Well, in fairness, the very first report we did, which dealt with the voting age, really commented very significantly on the need to improve the standard of civic and political education. And there were similar comments were made in the report on electoral reform. So I feel that we have, as a convention, been very clear and very consistent in expressing a view about the point you've just made, Pat. We're getting close, I think. Are we getting close to a result?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes, okay. So is there any real pearls of wisdom that haven't been uttered yet by any member? Any final thoughts that anyone wishes? The valedictory. Tom, you're back again. I'm being very lenient now at this stage. But
I've been asked to speak on behalf of both the citizen and politician members, and to express our thanks and appreciation for your excellent chairmanship, for the wonderful work done by Art and his very small team. To acknowledge also the work done by the various people, the experts, those working behind the scenes, and say thanks very much for a job well done, and we really appreciated the time here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tom, and I'm very glad I let you in a second time there. So, I think, we'll break for a couple of minutes and then we'll reconvene for the announcement of the vote. And could I just say, I think we said the main thank yous last night and eventually remembered Pat and Mary this morning. But it's been an enormous privilege and a pleasure to have had dealings with all of you. And just the sheer commitment and engagement and hard work that you were all represented and the fun that went with it has been a wonderful experience. Thank you.